June 19th, 1943. Henry Kissinger once said that the conventional army loses if it does not win. On the other hand, the guerrilla wins if he does not lose. That's exactly what Tito's partisans do this week. They do not lose, while the Axis opposing them are victorious, but do not win. Here's a word from the Time Ghost Army. Never forget. Never give up. Never surrender. Join the Time Ghost Army. I'm Spartacus Olsson, and this is War Against Humanity, a series of World War II in real time. Last week we saw the Battle of the Ruhr continue with new air raids on Düsseldorf, Münster and Wilhelmshaven, while in Axis-occupied Yugoslavia, the Axis anti-partisan Operation Schwarz was coming close to a conclusion. Overall, the Nazi mass murder of Jews had slowed down as the murders focused on those not destined for death by labor, among which were 2 transports of Dutch Jewish children and parents gassed in Sobibor. In Allied-occupied Iran and Bengal, British India, famines continue. In Bengal, the colonial government began policing the hoarding of foodstuffs in the countryside, confiscating what they deemed legitimate stocks of rice, and began shipping them to Calcutta. In Iran, the 1943 summer harvest alleviates the situation somewhat, but investigating American OSS agents in the field report that it is estimated that only about half the population is in a position to make adequate provisions for food supplies. The other half, whose condition is said to range from extreme poverty to complete destitution, is dependent on such measures as the government may put into force. Last year's effort gives no ground for optimism in this respect. In Bengal, the euphemistically named food drive to confiscate food from the countryside is now driving up food prices in the most vulnerable places, accelerating the descent into widespread famine and causing suspicion against the colonial government to expand. The majority of Bengali now have a daily calorie deficiency. This week, the magistrate of Faridpur conveys to the governor that the food drive has disclosed a very alarming state of things. In Bakargunj, there was very little rise, but several deaths from starvation. Anti-government sentiments grow even further when British Prime Minister Winston Churchill promotes Archie Wavell and Claude Auchinleck to Viceroy of India and Commander-in-Chief in India, respectively. With uniformed officers already going door to door for rice, the Indian government assesses that the average Indian regards it as the prelude to martial law. It is water on the mills for the forces seeking Indian independence, like nationalist Subhas Chandra Bose. He traveled to Nazi Germany last year to get support from the German Nazis. But these hopes soon withered as it became clear that the Nazis' only interest would be to use him for propaganda and seed unrest inside of the British Empire, but not to offer any actionable support. He helped the Nazis in a marginal way by convincing 4,500 British Indian POW to join the Wehrmacht as the Indian Legion. In April this year, they were sent to Zeeland in the Netherlands and posted as part of the Atlantic Wall Defensive Forces. By then, Bose had already given up on his Nazi adventures, hitched a ride on a German U-boat, which brought him around the Cape of Good Hope and into the Indian Ocean. There, he transferred to a Japanese submarine and headed for Japan. After arriving in May, now on June 10th, he meets with Japanese Prime Minister Tojo. Bose proposes to create an Indian National Army in exile to attack British forces in eastern India. He argues that this might cause the Indian population to rise up. 4 days later, he meets with Tojo again, and Tojo gives his blessing to the plan. On the 16th, Tojo addresses the nation, speaking about the greater Japanese co-prosperity sphere. We firmly resolved that Japan would do everything possible to help Indian independence. I am convinced the day of Indian freedom and prosperity is not far off. Bose will now attempt to activate and recruit the Indian diaspora, which is quite significant in places like Singapore, into the Indian National Army, hoping that one day it will be used to liberate India. Meanwhile, the effort to liberate Europe by carpet bombing into submission shifts its focus. Germany sees only moderate bombing by the RAF this week, with sorties flown on Oberhausen and Cologne, destroying a couple of hundred houses and killing 85 and 147 people respectively. Instead, The rain of bombs comes mainly on Sicily. In Indy's episode last week, you might have seen how the U.S. Army Air Force, with RAF support, overwhelmed the small island of Pantelleria, where the garrison surrendered after weeks of intense bombardment. This week, the focus shifts to flatten Italian defense capability and morale on Sicily and the Italian mainland in preparation of invasion. It's mainly the U.S. Army Air Force flying medium-sized daytime raids directed at targets of military significance. On Sicily, the attacks come towards the aerodromes at Gerbini, on Catania, on Sicily, and the railway yards and harbors of Messina. On the 18th, the historic city of Syracuse is attacked by Wellington heavy bombers dropping massive 4,000-pound bombs on the port city. These are, in theory, targets that are justifiable under the principles laid down in the Hague Conventions. But once again, as we have seen over and over again in this war on all sides, even the best-intended air raid lacks the technology needed to live up to the requirements to avoid collateral damage. The attacks end up destroying large parts of city centers and killing hundreds of civilians. In the first half of 1943, over 2,000 people die in Naples in a series of air raids. In Palermo, 300 people were killed in a single air raid on May 14th and 249 people in Livorno on May 28th. This week, on June 12th and 15th, Palermo is once again targeted, causing 30 civilian deaths. Further to the northeast, in Bosnia, occupied Yugoslavia, the deadly rain of bombs by the Luftwaffe into the Suceska Valley has ended as the battle between Axis and Tito's partisan forces moves into its final phase. On June 13th, the partisans on the west bank of the Suceska River find themselves divided in two. The large group of partisans, including Josip Tito himself, that broke out of the cauldron last week, are now at the Foča-Kalinovic Road. Here, the German 369th Legionary Division is set up for a desperate last-ditch effort to hold the line. They hold for one day, but on the 14th, the bulk of the battered partisan forces breaks through the lines and flees into the mountains to the west to fight another day. Behind them, the partisan 3rd Shock Division, tasked with protecting the central hospital, has only just managed to cross the Suceska River, where on the 13th they launch a futile attack on the southern positions held by the 7th SS Mountain Divisions. But they don't get far, and heavy German fire quickly breaks up the partisan lines. A few small groups manage to sneak through the lines and escape into the mountains. When the German force starts to move north to link up with the 118th Jäger Division on the north, the remaining partisans are cut off from both support and escape. The reports that come out will paint a picture of desperate last stands, partisan men and women, some just teenagers of 14, 15, in suicide charges straight into the machine gun fire from pillboxes, throwing grenades into the fortified positions as they fall in droves. One touching, tragic scene that I read was of a young partisan woman whose femur had been broken in battle, disabling her both from continued fighting and fleeing. Her young husband decides to stay with her in a grove on the mountainside to the last moment. Armed with only a pistol, he knows that they have no chance. When the German forces approach, he puts a bullet through his beloved's temple and then shoots himself. They probably suspected that this was a fate less dreadful than being captured, and they wouldn't have been wrong. German Commander Rudolf Lutters had ordered the destruction of every able-bodied man on the 10th, and the German, Croat, and Italian soldiers are bitterly bloodthirsty after the ruthless battle. German General Alexander Löhr, Lutter's boss, will remember the end of the battle like this. The fights were extraordinarily heavy. All the commanders agreed that their troops were going through the most bitter struggle of the war. A ferocious partisan attack which struck the 2nd Battalion of the 369th Division in particular effected a breakthrough on this front near Jelashka and Miljevina. All the enemy forces managed to retreat through this front and to disappear into the mountains towards the north. The German troops were too tired and exhausted to be able to do anything about it, and there were no reserves. Exhausted, perhaps, but not too tired to torture and murder captives and wounded, nurses, doctors, and civilians attached to the partisan troops and now caught in the mayhem. The 1st Mountain Division, 118th Jäger Division, and 369th Infantry Division report that of the 1,022 prisoners they took, they shot 716. Even though most fighting was over on the 13th, the German headquarters report that enemies killed in action increased with roughly 2,500 until June 15th. Moreover, the Prinz Eugen unit of the 7th SS Mountain Division reported 3,152 killed partisans, most of all the Axis units. But this unit wasn't engaged in the heaviest fighting by any measure. Instead, the kill tally most probably comes from acts of murder after the fighting was already finished. Of the 22,000 partisans fighting with the Yugoslav People's Liberation Army headquarters, 7,489 have been killed, roughly one-third. The Central Hospital and the majority of the 3rd Shock Division is all but eradicated. On June 15, Luthers declares victory and ends the operation. But it is not much more than a tactical victory. Sure, he has dealt the partisan army a crushing blow. Many settlements and bases of operations have been seized, and a staggering amount of Tito's army's fighting force has been killed. But the force and its leaders remain, and so does its spirit. New bases will arise, and new soldiers will be recruited. The German effort to eradicate partisans all over Europe is by no means over. On June 19th, Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler manages to persuade German Führer Adolf Hitler that his Banditenkampf, his war against any hostile elements, which in his delusional mind means the Jews and their supposed allies, needs more troops. He's been lobbying for this for months, and Hitler finally acquiesces, allowing Himmler to reclaim some SS and police units that had been transferred to combat on the Eastern Front. Himmler appoints one of his favorites, Erich von den Bach-Selewski, as overall commander of the new units. They are to be deployed to bandit combat areas in Austria, the Generalgouvernement, the district of Bialystok, Russia, Ukraine, and Croatia. They are given a wide berth of allowances to perform war crimes, especially in the Generalgouvernement, where they can shoot anyone ostensibly guilty of any action deemed by them to be, quote, against the work of German reconstruction. We've met von den Bach-Selewski before. He was the one that provided the idea and location for the Auschwitz concentration, labor, and murder complex back in early 1940. During Barbarossa, he was the head of the SS and order police in occupied Belarus and personally ordered the mass murders of hundreds of thousands of Jews by the Einsatzgruppen. Under his command were 14,953 SS and police officers, as well as 238,105 local volunteers, mostly anti-Semitic and anti-Soviet Belarusian, Russian, and Ukrainian nationalists who carried out his orders for genocide. As the slaughter of men, women, and children, neck shot by neck shot, progressed, he became concerned about the mental health of these men who'd volunteered to perform mass murder. He confronted Himmler about the toll it was taking on his troops and was one of the chief lobbyists for a more effective murder method, which we have seen the effects of in the past year. No doubt his concerns stemmed in part from his own state of mind. He has become addicted to opium, and in February last year, 1942, he was hospitalized with intestinal ailments resulting from his addiction, where the medical records state that he was suffering from hallucinations connected with the shooting of Jews. As he was recovering, he began petitioning Himmler for a combat position to fight partisans, and now he has gotten it. Von den Bach-Selewski is not only a favorite of Himmler, but also of Hitler, who greatly admires Erich's capacity to improvise and organize to get the job done in a most efficient manner. In other words, murder as many people as you possibly can in the shortest possible time. With him at the helm, it is likely that wherever his men are sent to, the anti-Nazi resistance and any civilians that are even suspect of aiding them will now face an escalation of terror when you could hardly think that further escalation was possible. Erich von den Bach-Selewski is only one of many who for years have labored together to wrap the world in a thick, bloodied mantle of terror that brings darkness and death to mankind. They disprove the alleged, quote, often misattributed to 18th century Irish philosopher and statesman Edmund Burke. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. They prove what Burke actually wrote right. When bad men combine, the good must associate, else they will fall, one by one, an unpitied sacrifice in a contemptible struggle. Yes, surely the bringers of suffering and death, when acting in unison, can plunge us into darkness, but they will go down into that abyss with us. They will suffer from their own deeds, develop gangrenous sores on their souls, and finally be eaten from the inside by the malice they carry. For every murder they commit, for every victory they gain, they grow weaker. So if enough of us come together with hope and fortitude to oppose the darkness, we have a chance, because those who fight evil bring light, and even in defeat grow stronger. Like the partisans in Yugoslavia this week, it is enough that a few live to fight another day. That brings hope. Hope nurtures love. Love brings unity. And if given enough time, love and unity will always defeat hatred and division. Never forget.